Your job title says principal engineer, but your code reads like it is completely allergic to modern structural standards. That is what the new Chief Technology Officer Julian Thorne sneered during his second week on the job, standing in front of a massive glass wall scribbled with pointless acronyms and some pyramid labeled technical debt detox. Nolan Vance did not flinch. He just blinked at him slowly, then turned back to his terminal. In his world, production was always green. Uptime was 99.998%. The revenue-generating services were humming along perfectly because his inelegant code, which he had duct-taped together through brutal late nights and caffeine tremors over the past 7 years, actually worked without fail. There was no unit test fetishism, no architecture astronauts pontificating about clean code theory, just robust working code that handled $17 million a month in transactions. But Julian did not care about any of that. Julian came in dressed like a high-end fashion catalog model, high on venture capital fumes and incredibly low on intellectual humility. Before Julian arrived, Nolan was the ghost in the shell of the corporate machine. He skipped the monthly town halls, never raised his hand during all-hands meetings, and his internal messaging emoji was just a simple steel wrench. But his fingerprints were everywhere across the infrastructure. There were scheduled cron jobs that nobody else dared to touch. There was resilient middleware that healed broken application programming interface chains automatically. He maintained data pipelines balanced on structural hacks, so precise they might as well have been neurosurgery. He was not glamorous by any stretch of the imagination. He was simply gravity. Julian, however, did not believe in gravity. In his lengthy onboarding speech, he declared the existing codebase a murky swamp of tribal knowledge and announced a high-velocity rewrite initiative that was completely full of buzzy, corporate rot like agility, first paradigms, and visibility ladders. Half the room nodded eagerly like brainwashed drones. The other half were far too stunned to even speak. Nolan did not nod at all. He just scrolled through endless error logs while Julian talked, silently fixing a critical billing bug that no one else even knew existed yet. First came the new project management boards, then the strict ticket rules, and finally the quiet layoffs began. Older developers who actually knew where the bodies were buried started disappearing one by one. They were swiftly replaced by bright-eyed fresh hires with slick online code repository profiles and absolutely zero war wounds from real production outages. These new kids coded fast, but the entire platform slowed down drastically. System latencies crept in like damp mold spreading across a basement wall. No one knew why the system was degrading except Nolan, and he knew exactly why it was happening. It was not the existing code that was inelegant. It was their fundamental lack of understanding. Julian did not just dismiss the past, he actively declared war on it. And Nolan, whether he liked it or not, represented that past. His tools of choice were robust command line scripts, compiled binaries, and raw system daemons. He used them not because they were trendy, but because they provided the absolute fastest way to keep the lights on and the revenue flowing. He was not just a coder. He was a master systems mechanic with dirty hands and a completely spotless performance record. And now, the guy who wore expensive loafers without socks wanted to replace him with shiny dashboard metrics. The cracks in the system started subtly at first. Julian Goldenhire tried to rewrite the core session management service and immediately triggered a massive memory leak in production during peak hours. Nolan fixed it silently through a secure backdoor script he never told anyone. He did not want praise for the fix. He just wanted peace and quiet to do his job. Then came the dreaded legacy logic review meeting. Julian pulled Nolan into a glass conference room and projected his repository code on the wall like it was a gruesome crime scene. He circled various lines in bright red digital ink. "This part has no modern documentation," Julian complained. "This looks like absolute recursion hell, and you used outdated comment styles in year 2023. Nolan slowly raised his eyes to meet Julian's gaze. "That specific line is the sole reason our payment processor has not flagged us for duplicate webhook retries." In 22 months, Nolan stated calmly. Julian paused for a fraction of a second, then smirked dismissively. "That does not make it elegant," Julian retorted. Nolan just stood up and walked out of the room without another word. After that encounter, he knew exactly what was coming. He started backing things up quietly. He saved his personal scripts, his deployment notebooks, and his comprehensive license history. He did this not out of paranoia, but out of calculated preparation. He was not scared of being fired. He was highly concerned about what would inevitably happen to the company after he was gone. Julian continued his ruthless pruning of the engineering staff. More senior engineers left, their messaging profiles turning into inactive gray silhouettes. The internal documentation wiki turned into an abandoned ghost town. Meanwhile, Julian strutted around the office with colorful graphs, showing code freshness metrics and team pulse surveys, looking exactly like a quack doctor showing healthy x-rays to a dying patient. And through all of this chaos, Nolan kept the platform heartbeat perfectly steady. His automated cron jobs purged stale authentication tokens every night. His hidden background workers quietly cleaned up orphaned invoice records. His handcrafted asynchronous tasks made absolute sure that no paying customer ever saw the chaotic mess brewing inside the company's servers. But Julian never asked about tangible outcomes or system stability. He only cared about optics and investor narratives. Nolan watched him give a flashy presentation to the executive board, loudly bragging about how he had successfully refactored 72% of legacy dependencies in just 2 short months. What Julian completely failed to mention was that nearly all of those shiny new services still ran directly through a single foundational thread. That thread was the old open-source library that powered the entire back-end service mesh of the company. It was a core library that Julian had actually praised on a professional networking site. In a post titled "Celebrating Open Source Heroes," Nolan saw that post. He did not usually care for poetry, but the sheer irony of that statement tasted incredibly sweet. Because what Julian did not know, what absolutely no one at the company knew, was that the critical library was entirely his creation. Nolan had written it 7 years ago, maintained it in total obscurity, and released it under a very strict business-hostile commercial license. And this company used it extensively. That night, Nolan went home, opened his terminal, typed a single complex command to trace the current production traffic patterns, and smiled a cold smile. Every single digital heartbeat in their massive system ran straight through his architectural veins, and they had just started the foolish process of cutting him off entirely. The glass conference room smelled intensely of overpriced cold brew coffee and inflated ego. Julian stood at the head of the long table, wearing his signature startup savior outfit consisting of tight slacks, an untucked white button-down shirt, and that smug little half-smile he probably practiced in the mirror every morning. He had an expensive laptop open, projecting a colorful pie chart with the title Engineering Efficiency Index written in a ridiculous font like it was some sort of inside joke. It was not a joke at all. "Let us be completely honest here," Julian said, waving a hand dismissively like he was conducting a grand orchestra of corporate sycophants. "Some of the older developers have been cruising on legacy thinking, which severely slows our forward velocity. We need agile engineers who ship features, not legacy mechanics who merely maintain old pipes." Nolan sat silently, watching as familiar names flashed across the presentation screen. There was Marcus, the guy who built their original billing module, now gone. There was Sarah, who architected the continuous integration pipeline that kept all deployments flowing smoothly, also gone. No one in the room dared to say it out loud, but everyone knew this was a targeted purge. One by one, the senior engineers were either performance reviewed into impossible growth opportunities or abruptly given severance packages accompanied by a thin, insincere human resources smile. Then, it was finally Nolan's turn to face the chopping block. They did not even bother calling it a standard performance review. His calendar invite coldly read Q2 Scalability Alignment Discussion. He walked into the room. Julian was already seated comfortably, flanked by a new human resources representative named Monica, who looked like she had been recruited from a networking site just the night before. Julian tapped the spacebar on his keyboard. The large screen immediately lit up with repository commit statistics, issue tracker ticket counts, and some convoluted velocity graph he clearly did not fully comprehend. "Nolan, your delivery cadence is stable, but stable is simply not scalable enough." "For our vision," Julian began, his voice dripping with condescension. We need elegant, investor-facing architecture, and frankly, a huge portion of your background services. While technically sound for a startup phase, completely lack modern design principles. Nolan just stared at him, his expression completely blank. What exactly do investor optics have to do with whether or not the background scheduler runs successfully at 3:14 in the morning without waking the entire development team with a critical pager alert? Nolan asked, his voice low and steady. Julian leaned back in his expensive ergonomic chair, steepling his fingers together like a budget movie villain. It is entirely about the corporate narrative, Nolan. We cannot possibly grow our valuation if our underlying codebase looks like a digital salvage yard. Nolan did not blink. That so-called salvage yard seamlessly handles $17 million a month in critical revenue events without causing a single double charge or drop transaction, Nolan replied. That may be historically true, Julian said, smiling like a man who had just skimmed a blog post on leading with manufactured empathy. But we are shifting rapidly toward a proactive, high-velocity future. We are moving to a composable first engineering culture. Nolan did not bother to argue again, because in that exact moment, he understood something deeply chilling. Julian was not actually talking about code quality. He was talking entirely about control. Julian clicked to the very next slide, highlighting what he called team inspiration. It was a massive picture of a repository documentation page from an open-source background task library that Julian loudly claimed had saved the company hundreds of thousands in monthly compute costs. It was Nolan Library. Julian did not even realize it. The chief technology officer was literally standing there, proudly using Nolan's own blood-soaked foundational work as a shiny trophy in the exact same meeting where he was actively trying to bury him. Nolan bit his lips so hard it stung. Monica, the human resources representative, slid a printed growth plan across the table that was little more than a thinly veiled termination notice on layaway. Julian ended the meeting with a dismissive tone. You are obviously smart, Nolan. I am absolutely sure you will land on your feet somewhere else, but we simply have to prioritize massive scalability. Nolan walked out of the room, his cheeks burning slightly, feeling momentarily humiliated, but simmering quietly under that burning ember of temporary embarrassment was something infinitely sharper, pure, unadulterated rage. He did not cry. He did not vent to his coworkers. He just went straight home, turned off his mobile phone, and opened his secure terminal. The very first thing he did was thoroughly verify the specific library license. His original repository was hosted under a standard permissive shell, but he had explicitly added one massive, ironclad key clause years ago. Commercial internal use in any for-profit corporate environment strictly requires explicit written consent and an active paid license registration from the original author. Then, he commenced the deeper digital dig. He systematically pulled the package registry access logs, the company internal repository forks, and the container image configuration layers. Every single one of them was deeply rooted in his proprietary open-source code. The lazy new developers had not even bothered to change the default configuration values. Those arrogant fools were actively running massive production services with his actual name still prominently displayed in the hidden code comments. He started downloading everything meticulously. He was not acting maliciously. He was acting methodically. He pulled system logs, extensive commit histories, third-party integration reports, and application programming interface keys from decommissioned side projects. He built massive dependency trees showing exactly how many core functions, critical endpoints, and financial cues still passed directly through his proprietary code. By midnight, he had compiled a massive encrypted folder appropriately labeled compliance evidence. There was no dramatic office announcement, no sentimental goodbye message on the company chat, and absolutely no passive-aggressive social media post. There was just cold, deliberate, legally binding documentation. He was not going to warn them. He was not going to shout or make a scene. He was simply going to wait, watch, and let Julian keep recklessly swinging his managerial axe, completely unaware that the massive tree he was cutting down was the exact same one holding up the entire corporate infrastructure forest. The final email came at 2:14 in the afternoon. The subject line read immediate termination and engineering transition. There was no polite greeting, no human explanation, just legally sanitized bullet points and a calendar link instructing him to process his final departure. His company chat access was cut off mid-thread. His virtual private network access was instantly revoked, and his code repository keys were dead. He could not even pull his own innocent code snippets from the cloud development environment. No one spoke to him. Not Julian, not the project managers, and not even the junior developers he had patiently mentored through their massive deployment failures. They did not even have the basic human decency to call it a company layoff. It was a surgical, silent execution. It was Julian's signature brand of corporate bloodletting. Nolan stared at his dark laptop screen for 5 full seconds, then 10, then 30. Nothing in the room moved. The empty chair across from his desk was still warm from the morning stand-up meeting where he had explained, for the fourth exhausting time, exactly why the shiny new notification system could not simply be decoupled from the legacy authentication service without throttling the crucial refresh token rotation. They had nodded blankly, said cool, and then immediately went back to logging pointless tickets about animated interface buttons. And now he was entirely gone. There were no words of thanks, no severance package offered, just a blank goodbye calendar invite and a monotone human resources drone named Monica, who coldly instructed him to please return any company assets to the lobby security desk by 5 o'clock in the evening. He sat in silence for a moment longer, then stood up gracefully. By the time he stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, the company chat was already violently lit up with Julian Arrogant victory lap. Julian posted that he was absolutely thrilled to announce a major back-end refactor initiative designed to massively reduce code debt and substantially improve investor transparency. Today, we take our next bold step towards truly scalable innovation, Julian wrote. The obnoxious post quickly garnered 4 fire emojis, 2 clapping hands, and somewhere buried deep in the comments. Someone quietly wrote that it was sad to see Nolan go, noting that his legacy would live in the system logs forever. Nolan did not even make it to the subway station before he stopped. He ducked into a small corner store, bought a cold soda, sat on a plastic crate behind the dumpster and just stared blankly at the condensation running down the aluminum can. He felt surprisingly empty. He was not deeply sad, nor was he violently angry. He just felt utterly vacuumed out. And then, a tiny spark flickered to life. It was not blind rage, not yet. It was something much cleaner and infinitely sharper, absolute focus. He pulled out his mobile phone, searched his own public repository, and carefully checked the last download timestamp. It was 34 minutes ago. That explicitly meant someone inside the company had manually triggered a fresh automated build right after he was officially fired. They were still using his library. They were using his unlicensed, explicitly commercial use restricted library. He tapped the screen to carefully reread the specific legal clause he had drafted years ago, long before he even knew this arrogant company would ever exist. Section 5C clearly stated that any for-profit entities utilizing the software in internal business operations must definitively secure a commercial license agreement directly with the original author. There was absolutely no legal ambiguity, and there were 0 loopholes. They were in massive, undeniable breach of contract, and he possessed everything needed to prove it. He had every single integration logged, every metadata cryptographic hash recorded, and every continuous integration pipeline, ping, meticulously time-stamped and securely archived. He had not merely built a functional code library. He had constructed a live, pulsing digital fingerprint tracker permanently embedded deeply into every single core service they now relied upon to run their entire multi-million-dollar business. They did not just wrongfully fire him. They foolishly fired the structural foundation of their company. And they did it with 0 actual comprehension of what truly kept their complex architecture alive and breathing. Julian completely failed to realize it, but by cutting Nolan loose, he had not saved the company a single dime. He had just confidently tossed a lit match into a massive, poorly ventilated warehouse completely full of dry paper and highly volatile gasoline. Nolan finished his cold soda, calmly tossed the empty can into the proper recycling bin, pulled out his phone once again, and sent a direct message to Valerie. Valerie was his old college roommate, who was now a ruthless senior partner at a boutique technology intellectual property law firm downtown. "Hey Valerie," he typed. "Do you still handle aggressive software license enforcement cases?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Only when the target is incredibly lucrative and the case is actually fun," she wrote back. Nolan smiled grimly. "Good," he replied. "I have got a massively live one for you. We are talking multi-million-dollar commercial usage with absolutely no signed contract." "That is my absolute favorite flavor of litigation," Valerie responded. Nolan stood up from the plastic crate, feeling the familiar ache slowly return to his tired limbs. It was not a sudden rush of adrenaline. It was a quiet, potent kind of fuel. The specific kind of accelerant you pour, extremely slowly and steadily, right before you finally light the explosive fuse. He walked all the way home, booted up his secure personal machine, opened a highly encrypted private repository, and carefully dropped a compressed file, clearly labeled Revoke Trigger, into the main directory. Then he began to write. He did not write code, and he did not write scripts, at least not yet. He started meticulously outlining the financial invoice. It was aggressively itemized, comprehensively time-tracked, and explicitly tied to specific, identifiable corporate services. Each massive financial charge was linked directly to their active, unauthorized usage of his strictly licensed product. There was no emotional anger in the document, no loud shouting, just pure, undeniable mathematics. Cold, relentless, devastating mathematics. They desperately wanted to save corporate money by firing him. He was about to vividly show them exactly what that foolish decision was going to cost them. Valerie looked over the dense license text twice, then a third time just to be absolutely certain. They sat quietly in a trendy downtown cafe with peeling exposed brick walls and ridiculously overpriced pour-over coffee, their glowing laptops forming a barrier between them like crucial evidence exhibits in a high-stakes corporate murder trial. Nolan did not speak a single word. He did not have to say anything. Valerie narrowed her eyes to sharp razors as she carefully traced the explicit lines of Nolan custom open-source legal clause. "Good grief," Valerie muttered under her breath. "This is not just a legally gray area. This is a wide-open season for massive corporate liability, and you have all the digital receipts." Nolan took a slow sip of his black coffee. "I intentionally kept that specific clause deeply buried in the repository subdirectory for 7 years," he explained calmly. "No one at the company ever bothered to ask about it." Valerie leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile forming. "They really should have asked," she said. "Because the exact second they ran this software in a for-profit environment without your explicit written permission, they legally parked a massive tanker truck on your front lawn and started aggressively siphoning your oil without paying a single cent." She confidently flipped her laptop screen around to face him. "Look here," she pointed. "This is your baseline damage calculation. According to the platform's own internal metrics, they have aggressively downloaded updates to your package 114 times in the last 90 days alone. You possess multiple continuous integration logs with their corporate domain explicitly hard-coded into the requests. And this specific background function right here, the internal worker panic recovery module, it is still actively timestamping outbound error reports with your unique cryptographic signature hash." Nolan nodded slowly. "I repeatedly told them it was a legacy system. They arrogantly thought legacy simply meant disposable." Valerie smirked coldly, then quickly tapped out a few precise lines in a shared digital document. "Let us draft the invoice for egregious licensing violation," she narrated. "Commercial internal use by the redacted corporation. We have unauthorized usage across 114 runtime instances spanning 14 critical services, at a standard retroactive rate of $12,500 per instance. That totals $1,425,000. We will add severe additional penalties for blatant non-disclosure, plus a hefty fee for the immediate cease and desist draft attached." She slid the laptop back over to him. "We can absolutely send this massive atomic bomb tomorrow morning. Hell, I could personally walk it over to their office in a full tuxedo with a loud brass band if you really want, because you have already got them completely nailed to the wall." Nolan stared intensely at the glowing screen for a very long time. The numbers were staggering, but the money was secondary. He slowly reached out, gently closed the laptop lid, and shook his head. "Not quite yet," Nolan said, his voice as calm as a meditating monk on heavy sedatives. Valerie blinked in genuine surprise. "Why on earth would we wait?" she asked. "Because I want them to truly feel it first," Nolan replied, his eyes cold and distant. "I do not just want them to feel the financial pain of the invoice. I want them to deeply feel the agonizing absence of my work." That very night, Nolan built a custom monitoring dashboard. It was not flashy or overly complex. It was just a dark terminal-fed page pulling data directly from public uptime pings, status page delta changes, and frantic third-party developer chatter. He systematically scraped social media platforms, tech forums, and application programming interface discussion boards. He set up highly sensitive keyword alerts for deeply concerning phrases like authentication delay, background job completely stuck, and invoice synchronization perpetually failing. Every single time a new thread went up about their platform misbehaving, he meticulously marked it. When a desperate junior developer posted a frantic cry for help about flaky login sessions or overnight server errors, he quickly captured a screenshot. When a furious corporate user loudly complained that their critical billing data was lagging 3 full days behind schedule, he timestamped the complaint and securely added it to his growing evidence folder. The very first significant hit came merely 2 days after he was officially let go. A prominent startup founder angrily posted online, "Is the redacted corporation platform down yet again? I have experienced a gateway timeout 3 separate times this week." This new modernization update broke way more things than it supposedly fixed. Nolan smiled thinly and carefully logged the link into his database. He keenly noticed that the exact time of the furious post matched almost perfectly with when their servers had last desperately pulled his open-source package. The very next day, another angry post surfaced, noting wildly weird behaviors with the redacted corporation webhook processor. "Anyone else seeing massively duplicate invoices?" the user pleaded. Nolan did not respond to the thread. He absolutely did not warn his former employer. He just sat back and watched the chaos unfold. Exactly 1 week later, his public repository profile showed an alarming spike. It was a 500% massive increase in download traffic for his core library. A single corporate internet protocol address showed over 30 pulls in a frantic 6-hour window. Nolan intimately knew that specific address. It belonged directly to their internal continuous integration build server. They were completely panicking, and they were blindly reaching deep into a complex system they fundamentally did not understand. They were recklessly running builds on code they absolutely no longer had any legal right to touch. Nolan slowly opened the drafted invoice once again and carefully adjusted the total amount. The initial $1,425,000 swiftly ballooned to a staggering $3,400,000 due to punitive breach escalation fees. Valerie called him early the next morning. "Are you absolutely sure you want to hold off on sending this?" she asked. "Yes," Nolan replied firmly. "Let them bleed out just a little bit more first." He was no longer simply playing for the financial payout. He was playing for the massive echoing ripple effect. He was waiting for the exact moment Julian would be forced to stand in front of the executive board, his soft hands violently trembling, desperately pretending everything was totally under control, while the entire corporate infrastructure literally turned to burning digital static right behind him. He could already vividly see it happening, not because he merely hoped for it, but because he mathematically knew it was inevitable. It started innocently enough with minor login lag. It was just a few annoying seconds at first, nothing truly worth a severe priority 1 support ticket. Then, the core data synchronization service started violently choking during peak business hours. Critical customer emails went out hours late. Financial invoices bizarrely duplicated themselves like manic rabbits on heavy stimulants. The terrified junior developers huddled together in the internal company chat, nervously muttering vague excuses about queue poisoning and weird timing mismatches. What they really meant was that they had absolutely no idea what the hell they were looking. Then, the public status page blatantly lied to the customers. Julian had specifically rigged it for so-called proactive transparency, which was actually just corporate smoke and mirrors. Everything falsely showed a healthy green status even as furious customers were completely flooding the support inbox with bug-eyed, vein-popping rage. One massive enterprise client furiously emailed, "Our monthly billing invoices are completely tripled. My lead accountant seriously thinks we have been maliciously hacked. What the absolute hell is going on over there?" Inside the company walls, the remaining engineers flailed around helplessly like panicked cats, violently tossed into a deep swimming pool. They desperately reopened Nolan old legacy branches, blindly hoping to miraculously salvage something remotely usable. But absolutely no one understood how the complex background services actually meshed together. Julian's highly touted scalable architecture was rapidly turning into a monstrous Frankenstein of half-baked microservices and shoddily repackaged application programming interface wrappers clumsily duct-taped to a mountain of buzzword-laden chaos. The incredibly elegant throttling module Nolan had carefully written, the one that brilliantly smart-throttled cron job loads across multiple data centers based entirely on QLag, was completely gone. Julian had arrogantly called it hopelessly over-engineered and hastily replaced it with a fragile third-party integration chain and three serverless functions that rapidly ate through system memory like a starving elephant. By late Friday afternoon, over half of the core, the quiet, unseen engineers are the absolute real stars of the corporate digital jungle.